You will think it's about healing, but it's not. It's about confrontation. You will think shadow work is soft, nurturing, spiritual, the kind of thing you do with candles and affirmations. But in truth, it is brutal. It is the dismantling of every illusion you've ever used to feel safe. You've been told to love your light, but Jung warned that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that is the real work most people avoid. Because the shadow isn't the bad parts of you. It's the hidden parts. The versions of you that were rejected, shamed, silenced, or strategically buried to survive. The rage you swallowed to stay loved. The sensuality you hid to be respected. The intelligence you downplayed to be accepted. Every trait, instinct, and desire you once disowned has not died, it waits, buried alive in the unconscious. And there, it rules you. Until one day, a relationship cracks you open. A lover's rejection. A friend's betrayal. A sudden wave of jealousy, envy, or obsession. You think it's about them, but Jung would tell you, it's not. It's the shadow knocking on the door of your awareness, saying, "See me." That is the beginning of shadow work. Not when you meditate, but when you feel triggered. Not when you're calm, but when your ego burns. Because shadow work begins the moment you can say, "This pain is mine." A woman who walks this path begins to see her patterns. She starts noticing how she attracts the same unavailable men, because they mirror her own unavailability to herself. She sees how she gives endlessly, because somewhere she learned that being needed is safer than being truly seen. She sees how she keeps shrinking around others, because her own power once frightened those who could not hold it. And in that awareness, she begins to reclaim the pieces of herself she once abandoned. But here's the truth most never tell you. Shadow work is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. And wholeness requires embracing the very parts of you that society told you to exile. You see, the modern world loves positivity. It praises light, kindness, gratitude, all beautiful things. But when positivity becomes avoidance, it robs you of depth. Because without darkness, there is no contrast. Without grief, no compassion. Without rage, no boundaries. Without loss, no true love. Jung knew this paradox well, that what we suppress controls us more than what we accept. The woman who represses her anger becomes passive-aggressive. The woman who represses her sensuality becomes cold or performative. The woman who represses her ambition calls it humility, but underneath, she aches with resentment. And so, the work is to bring these hidden energies back into the light, not to glorify them, but to integrate them. Because integration is what makes you powerful. There is nothing more magnetic than a woman who has met her shadow. Because she cannot be manipulated by guilt or shame anymore. She does not need validation, she is validation. Her boundaries are not defenses, they are declarations of self-respect. And her presence alone reminds others of the freedom that comes from self-ownership. But the road there is not pretty. It is not made of soft words or gentle mirrors. It's the kind of journey where you will cry for versions of yourself you didn't even know existed. You will meet the parts of you that lied, controlled, envied, or judged, and instead of rejecting them, you will sit with them. You will ask them why they were born. And they will tell you, because I was trying to protect you. That's when the work begins to transform from pain into power. Because the shadow was never your enemy, it was your guardian in disguise. It carried your survival instincts, your forbidden emotions, your unlived potential. And the moment you stop running from it, you begin to evolve from the fragmented self into the integrated soul. But make no mistake, this journey demands courage. It requires the humility to admit you are not only the victim in your story, but also the one who perpetuates your own suffering. It requires radical responsibility, the kind that ends the cycle of blame and opens the door to freedom. Because the real meaning of shadow work is not about fixing yourself. It is about facing yourself. And the woman who can face herself, all of herself, becomes untouchable. Her peace is not fragile. Her love is not desperate. Her power is not loud, it is silent, certain, sovereign. There comes a moment, somewhere between breaking and awakening, when a woman realizes she has been living half a life. Half in light, the parts she performs for approval, the faces she wears to be loved. And half in shadow, the parts she hides, disowns, or explains away. For years, she's called this balance goodness. But it is not balance, it is bondage. Because when a woman's soul is split, she cannot feel whole. She may appear composed, capable, admired even. But beneath that composure lives a quiet despair, a sense that something vital has been lost. That's the shadow's whisper, remember me. Shadow work, then, is not self-improvement. It is self-retrieval. It is calling back the power you gave away to be light. The voice you silenced to avoid conflict. The boundaries you blurred to be chosen. It is remembering that every time you swallowed your truth, a fragment of you fell into the dark, waiting for your return. Jung called this the process of individuation, the soul's journey toward becoming what it truly is, unmasked, unedited, unafraid. And yet, the ego resists. Because individuation demands death, the death of every false self we've built to survive. That's why the shadow reveals itself not through calm reflection, but through friction. Through jealousy that exposes desire. Through anger that uncovers injustice. Through envy that points to unclaimed potential. Each uncomfortable emotion is not a flaw, but a map guiding you toward the part of you that wants to come home. When a woman feels jealous of another's beauty, it is not hatred, it is recognition. Somewhere, her own radiance has been buried under shame. When she feels envy toward another's success, it is not weakness, it is longing. A sign that her own gifts ache to be expressed. When she burns with rage at disrespect, it is not chaos, it is her boundaries rising from the ashes, demanding to be seen. This is why true shadow work cannot be done from the mind alone. It is done through the body, through presence, through emotion. Because the body remembers everything the mind forgets. Every time she froze instead of speaking, the body recorded it. Every time she smiled through pain, the muscles stored it. Every time she apologized for existing too loudly, her nervous system learned that safety meant smallness. And now, when she tries to expand, to love, to express, the body trembles. Not because she's broken, but because she's healing. To meet the shadow is to meet the body's truth. That safety is not found in shrinking, but in sovereignty. That peace is not found in silence, but in integration. A woman who does this work begins to glow differently. Not the artificial glow of perfection, but the grounded radiance of truth. Her eyes soften, not because she is naive, but because she no longer fears her own darkness. She can hold contradictions, strength and softness, light and shadow, love and anger, without collapsing into guilt or confusion. That is real maturity, the ability to contain paradox without seeking to erase it. And slowly, life begins to mirror her inner integration. Relationships become mirrors of growth rather than wounds of repetition. She no longer chases validation, she magnetizes respect. She no longer fears rejection, she welcomes authenticity. Because she has seen her shadow, and in doing so, she has seen her truth. But make no mistake, this awareness does not make life easier. It makes it truer. Shadow work is not about escaping pain, it's about transmuting it. Because pain, when faced with consciousness, becomes wisdom. And wisdom, when embodied, becomes power. Yet, this transformation comes with a cost, the end of illusion. The moment she sees through her patterns, she can no longer pretend not to know. The moment she understands her projection, she can no longer blame. The moment she claims her shadow, she can no longer play small. And that is terrifying to the ego. Because the ego thrives on the familiar, even if the familiar is suffering. So, it will whisper, stay where it's safe. Don't look too deep. But the soul has already tasted truth, and truth, once tasted, cannot be forgotten. Shadow work demands surrender, not to others, but to one's own becoming. It is the descent before the ascent, the undoing before the awakening. And every woman who dares to walk into her own darkness discovers the same thing. There is nothing there to fear, only everything she has ever been. There is a silence that arrives after the breaking, a stillness that feels both sacred and unbearable. It is the space between who she was and who she is becoming. And in that silence, the shadow begins to speak. It doesn't speak in words, but in sensations. A tightening in the chest when she ignores her truth. A heaviness in the stomach when she betrays her boundaries. A subtle exhaustion after pleasing everyone but herself. The body becomes the new oracle, whispering the language of the unconscious. This is where most turn back. Because it's easier to call this discomfort overthinking than to realize it's awakening. Easier to numb than to feel. Easier to analyze than to surrender. But the woman who continues, who chooses to feel, steps into an ancient initiation. She becomes both the student and the subject, the alchemist and the raw material. She learns that shadow work is not about understanding with the intellect, but embodying with the soul. And so she descends deeper, into memories that were never fully felt. The first heartbreak she never mourned. The humiliation she pretended didn't matter. The mother's coldness she explained away as discipline. The father's absence she turned into independence. Each one returns, not to punish her, but to be released. To the unconscious, what is unfelt remains unfinished. And so the past repeats, not to torment, but to complete itself. Every toxic pattern, every emotional trigger, every painful repetition is a messenger, saying, "Feel me now, so I no longer have to repeat." The mind may resist. It wants logic, clarity, closure. But the heart speaks in rhythm, not reason. And the heart will keep breaking until it breaks open. Here, she learns one of Jung's deepest truths. That the shadow, once integrated, becomes the gold of the soul. Because what was once shame becomes strength. What was once rage becomes sacred fire. What was once fear becomes discernment. Every darkness, when embraced, reveals a hidden virtue within it. The woman who once hid her anger now channels it into boundaries. The woman who once feared her passion now moves through life with creative fire. The woman who once felt unworthy now walks with quiet certainty. This is not magic, it is integration. She begins to understand that every archetype within her, the lover, the warrior, the mother, the huntress, the mystic, has both light and shadow. To deny one side is to distort the other. A woman who denies her warrior becomes compliant. A woman who denies her lover becomes detached. A woman who denies her mother becomes cold. A woman who denies her mystic becomes lost. Wholeness means letting them all exist, without hierarchy. This is the heart of individuation, the reunion of opposites. Not light without dark, but light through dark. Not purity, but complexity. Not perfection, but presence. And when she stands in this truth, her energy changes. She no longer moves from reaction, but from awareness. She no longer seeks control, because she has cultivated trust, not in the world, but in herself. She can face conflict without collapse, solitude without loneliness, desire without shame. Her emotions no longer dominate her, they serve her. Because she has stopped fighting what is natural. She has remembered that darkness is not evil, it is fertile. Every seed grows in the dark before it meets the light. And so does she. This realization softens her. She no longer judges herself for her triggers, her tears, her desires. She listens to them like old friends, carrying messages from forgotten realms of her psyche. The once feared shadow becomes her greatest ally, the mirror that never lies. But this alliance demands honesty. It demands the courage to admit, yes, I wanted to be chosen. Yes, I felt jealousy. Yes, I feared being unlovable. Not to dwell in victimhood, but to reclaim agency from it. Because only when truth is spoken can freedom begin. And freedom, for a woman, begins with the words, I am allowed to be all that I am. From this point forward, her healing no longer feels like striving, it feels like remembering. She remembers her natural power, her original wholeness, her inherent worth. She realizes she was never broken, only disconnected. And connection, she learns, begins with radical self-acceptance. To love one's shadow is not indulgence, it is sacred rebellion. It is to say, even the parts of me you taught me to hide are holy. That declaration changes everything. Because once she embraces her shadow, the world's opinions lose power over her. She no longer performs to be loved, she radiates love. She no longer begs for belonging, she embodies it. And her life, once ruled by fear of judgment, becomes an expression of truth. The deeper she goes, the quieter she becomes. Not the silence of repression, but the silence of presence, a stillness born of inner reconciliation. The noise that once filled her mind, the self-doubt, the endless comparisons, the need to explain herself, begins to dissolve, replaced by something ancient, something knowing. For when a woman meets her shadow, she meets the sacred feminine in its rawest form, not the polished goddess of perfection, but the wild, untamed force of truth. This truth does not whisper sweet affirmations, it growls. It burns through illusion. It refuses to let her play small. At first, this raw energy terrifies her. After all, she was raised to equate softness with virtue, compliance with goodness, and silence with grace. But grace, she begins to see, is not the absence of power, it is power held with tenderness. And so, she learns to let both coexist. There are moments when the shadow still pulls her back, flashes of jealousy, old insecurities, the ache for validation. But now, she no longer fights them. She observes them, breathes into them, and whispers, I see you. And in that seeing, the shadow softens. Because all it ever wanted was acknowledgement. She starts to live with a new kind of awareness, one that no longer divides the world into good and bad, light and dark, success and failure. She sees the duality in everything, and therefore, she is no longer ruled by it. When she feels pain, she doesn't rush to escape it, she asks what it's teaching her. When she feels joy, she doesn't grasp to hold it, she lets it flow through her freely. This is emotional mastery, not control, but communion. In this space, relationships transform. She no longer attracts those who mirror her wounds, but those who mirror her wholeness. Because like attracts like, and she has become integrated. She no longer seeks saviors, because she no longer needs saving. She understands that love cannot rescue what she refuses to take responsibility for. And yet, she also learns compassion. She sees that others are trapped in their own shadows, just as she once was. Instead of judging them, she recognizes their pain as the language of the unconscious calling for healing. She no longer seeks revenge or control, she chooses understanding, not for them, but for her own peace. This is the subtle liberation of shadow work. To see without projecting, to feel without drowning, to love without losing oneself. But this liberation doesn't make her invincible, it makes her real. And real women bleed. They grieve. They break open and rebuild, over and over again. Because life will always test what consciousness has revealed. So the universe sends lessons in the form of mirrors, a lover who triggers her abandonment wound, a friend who betrays her trust, a situation that forces her to speak her truth when silence would be safer. Each moment becomes a ceremony, a chance to embody what she now knows. And though she still trembles, she no longer retreats. Because courage, she realizes, is not the absence of fear, it's the intimacy with it. She learns to dance with discomfort, to breathe through uncertainty, to sit inside contradiction. The more she does, the stronger her inner container becomes. The world may still reject her, misunderstand her, envy her, but it no longer defines her. She no longer lives to be understood, she lives to be authentic. And that authenticity has a quiet magnetism. People feel it before they can name it, a kind of grounded confidence, a sense that this woman cannot be easily swayed or owned. Because she belongs to herself now. Jung said that one does not integrate the shadow to become good, but to become whole. And wholeness is far more powerful than goodness. Goodness can be manipulated, wholeness cannot. Goodness seeks permission, wholeness is permission. So she begins to live from her wholeness. She speaks when truth calls, even if her voice shakes. She rests when her body asks, even when the world demands more. She walks away not out of anger, but out of clarity. And she gives love freely, not as a transaction, but as an overflow. Her light is no longer about brightness. It's about depth. It's the kind of light that doesn't blind, it illuminates. Because she has walked through her darkness, and now, she carries a lantern inside her. The shadow that once haunted her has become her compass. It points not to danger, but to alignment. Every trigger, every fear, every longing is now an invitation to deeper truth. She no longer asks, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What in me is ready to evolve?" And that question changes everything. Because when a woman begins to ask that, she stops being a victim of her life, and becomes its conscious creator. There comes a sacred turning point, a quiet, invisible moment when the woman no longer searches for the light, because she has realized, she is the light, and the darkness is her teacher. This is not enlightenment as the world imagines it. It's not about transcending pain or rising above the human condition. It's about descending so deeply into the truth of one's being that even pain becomes sacred. Because she now understands, the shadow was never the opposite of the light, it was the womb that birthed it. She remembers how she used to chase peace, through self-help rituals, through achievements, through the validation of others. But peace never came, because peace cannot be found in avoidance. It only blooms in acceptance. So she stops chasing and starts allowing. She allows the sadness, without labeling it weakness. She allows the anger, without calling it unspiritual. She allows the desire, without drowning it in guilt. And in that radical allowing, she becomes free. Because freedom is not the absence of emotion, it is the mastery of presence within emotion. To feel fully, without being consumed. To hurt deeply, without losing compassion. To love fiercely, without abandoning oneself. This is the rebirth that follows the shadow's embrace, not the return to who she was, but the emergence of who she was always meant to be. The false layers fall away, the people-pleasing, the perfectionism, the fear of disapproval. What remains is essence. And essence does not beg. It beholds. The more she lives in essence, the more her external world aligns. Relationships that once drained her fade quietly, as if the universe itself is rearranging her life to match her vibration. New connections emerge, soulful, honest, unpretentious. They do not flatter her light, they respect her depth. They do not seek to possess her, they stand beside her. She begins to notice beauty in everything, even endings. She no longer sees them as loss, but as release. Because when something departs, she knows it is making space for something truer. That is the wisdom of a woman who has integrated her shadow. She trusts the rhythm of life. This trust is not naive, it is earned. It was carved from nights of uncertainty, from moments on the floor when surrender was her only option. But from that surrender, something miraculous emerged: faith. Not in outcomes, not in people, but in her own resilience. She carries herself differently now. There's a calm that follows her, the kind that comes from no longer needing to prove anything. She no longer seeks validation because she has touched something eternal within her, something no opinion can touch. And so, when love arrives, she welcomes it, not from hunger, but from wholeness. She no longer confuses attachment with intimacy. She no longer chases chemistry that mirrors her trauma. She no longer mistakes chaos for passion. Because her nervous system has learned the language of peace. She now understands that love is not meant to fill her, but to expand her. And she can only expand when she is rooted, not in another, but in herself. That's the paradox of the integrated woman. She is both soft and unshakable, open yet self-contained, yielding yet powerful. Her boundaries are not walls, they are sacred containers for love to flow with direction. Her no is no longer laced with fear, it's spoken with grace. Her yes is no longer desperate, it's chosen with intention. She no longer moves from reaction, she moves from resonance. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the birth of the authentic self. The moment when the soul, having faced its own darkness, no longer depends on external approval to exist. It simply is. Unafraid. Unapologetic. Unconditional. And in that state, everything changes, not because life becomes easier, but because she does. The same storms that once drowned her now cleanse her. The same silence that once terrified her now soothes her. The same loneliness that once hollowed her now births creativity, wisdom, and devotion. Because she no longer runs from her inner world, she walks in it as its queen. And a queen does not need to be crowned, she reigns by presence alone. This is the culmination of shadow work. The realization that nothing within her was ever meant to be exiled. Every part, the wounded child, the fierce protector, the silent dreamer, belongs. When she integrates them all, she becomes unstoppable not by dominance, but by alignment. She no longer seeks to be chosen, she chooses. She no longer seeks to be understood, she understands. And in that understanding, the wars within her end. Now, peace is not something she visits. It is something she is. The woman who has met her shadow becomes whole, and the world feels it. She becomes the mirror of what humanity could be, conscious, compassionate, and free. The woman who knows her worth does not chase. She chooses.